What's up, guys? Today we are working on the transmission for the Civic. Just a little background. Last spring I was racing a friend of mine and beat him because, obviously. And then on my way home I started hearing some noises and I came home and realized the idler pulley for the AC fell off and was like grinding up against stuff. Pulled that all out, took it back for another drive and realized the transmission was also making noise. It drove perfectly fine, continued to drive it anyway. And then it started getting worse and I had some downtime while I was waiting for parts for the FRS, so I pulled the transmission out. You guys have seen the video on that. And here we are now. We are going to take apart this transmission and figure out where the noise is coming from. Fingers crossed that it's just like a bearing or something. If that's the case, I'm going to buy a rebuild kit for the transmission and change out the synchros and all the bearings and everything. But I've already rebuilt this transmission. I've just had it apart a few times, like when I installed the LSD, and I've reinstalled some stuff wrong at one point, so it's probably all my fault that this thing is not in the correct condition. Worst case scenario, I will buy another transmission and swap the differential over. However, these transmissions are getting harder to find. This is a 92 to 95 EX transmission. I could go, I believe my differential will work in a 96 to 2000 EX transmission, but just transmissions for these cars in general are getting harder to find, and when you do find them, they're for a D16 or a Y7, and that's not the gear ratios that I want. So, and I'm not looking to spend a ton of money. Like I paid $100 for this trans back in the day, and now they go for a few $100s, one with a differential, and this is probably closer to 1,000. So I'm not looking to spend a whole ton of money. All right, so let's go ahead and pull the lid off of this thing. All right, so I took out this cap right here, and as you can see, there's like a bunch of plastic and metal all right here already, and the casing is broken. So what that makes me think is this top bearing right here probably exploded. The thing that sucks about that is I will probably need at least a new casing, if not a whole new transmission. But we're gonna go ahead and keep taking this apart and see how the gear set looks. Hopefully it's just that one bearing, and I just need a new casing right here. Even then, I'm not gonna be able to just buy one of these. I'm gonna probably have to get a transmission from a junkyard and swap out the casing or swap out the internals. All right, so here's the extent of the damage. This bearing right here was actually fine, but it's a needle bearing, and I picked it up off of there, and all these little dudes went flying. So not a big deal. That's not part of the damage, really. What's part of the damage is this top bearing essentially exploded, and then what that caused was movement up here, and all that metal up top ground down this nut and the top of the counter shaft. The input shaft bearing still seems kind of okay. I'm gonna have to replace all of the bearings at this point. I might be able to still use this counter shaft because just the top wore off, but I am at least going to need another transmission for the case. I think at this point, if I can find an EX transmission, I'd rather just replace it and rebuild a new one. But if I can't find one in working condition, I can maybe reuse this counter shaft and just buy a rebuild kit and get a new case. Everything else in here seems perfectly fine. It still shifted through all the gears and still drove fine. It just made noise, which makes sense because there was nothing holding this in place at the top of the case. So what I need to do right now is see if I can get this nut off. You really kind of need an impact gun to get this off because you need something, you need this to not spin. So you need like quick torque. I'm gonna try to hammer a socket onto here and see if I can get this nut off. All right, I did not have the right size socket. That is a 30 millimeter. I think I used a 32 to get that off last time, which obviously won't work in this case. I need the exact size. So, and bought myself a 30 millimeter socket, but it's 12 point. So I don't know how this is actually gonna work. Just in case, I bought the next size socket down available, which you would think would be 29, but I could not find a 29 millimeter socket anywhere. So I got 1/8", which is in between 28 and 29. So I'm gonna try the 30 first. If that doesn't work, then I'm gonna hammer on the 1/8" and try to get it off that way.
They try but they can't get rid of me. I keep on coming with energy. I keep on bringing that energy. Energy, energy, energy. I feel on top of the top.
All right, so I stuffed the 30 on there and I hammered it down and spun it, and it did kind of ruin this socket, which is a little bit of a pain in the butt because this was like $11. I kind of expected it to not really last, but $11 worth it. I was able to get this nut off, and everything else underneath seems perfectly fine. This is a little chewed up on top here, but I would say that this counter shaft is reusable. So I made a post online trying to get myself a new transmission case, because that, I don't know, I could maybe reuse the case as well, but it's really chewed up. It's definitely damaged. Like, it's not like barely damaged like this. It's very much damaged. I'll just show you again. So right there, all of this is busted. The case would still be sealed. From this side, it looks like it could be okay. It's pretty chewed up in there, but if I cleaned it all out really good, this part that actually holds the shaft, the counter shaft, is still intact. So maybe it would be okay. But there is one of those for 180 bucks on eBay right now, and I might scoop that up. I looked at all of my local junkyards because transmissions are cheap around here, but not a single person has an EX 92 to 95 or 96 to 2000 transmission that this differential would fit. So I could order a whole new transmission online, or the case, or I could make this case work. Either way, I do have to buy a rebuild kit, a new one of these nuts, this washer right here, these, like, all of the bearings. So I'm gonna get all the bearings in synchros, this nut and washer, the 2 washers down there, and I think that's it. It's probably gonna run me about $200. So I don't wanna put $200 into this transmission and then destroy it again by having the casing be a little messed up. So I think I'm just gonna suck it up and buy a new outer shell as well as rebuild kit. But everything else seems like it should be fine. There is a lot of metal all over the place. I was wrong about this bottom bearing. There's normally plastic race with all of those little needle pins on it, and that's broken. Plus, I noticed that one of them, like this was one of them, I think, and it's completely destroyed. I don't know, man. I'm gonna have to go through here and pull out all of these metal bits and clean this thing out really well. But that's a job for another day. Okay, one more quick update, because I just looked at one of these online and I realized that down here actually looks pretty much the same as it does from the factory, that hole down there. The rest of it is pretty torn up, but it's not bad. And you can see this is actually left over from the bearing, and the bearing is split in half. So I think I'm just gonna reuse this case. I changed my mind. It doesn't look the best, but I'm gonna clean it out really good, and I'm just gonna reuse it because I can't justify paying, it's actually $190 plus shipping. I just can't justify paying that for an outer case. I'd rather just buy a transmission, like wait for one to pop up locally and buy it. So I'm gonna reuse this, and if it doesn't work out, then I'll buy another transmission. Okay guys, today we are picking up where we left off with the Civic, working on the transmission here. I gotta finish taking this thing apart so I can rebuild it. I got all the parts in. Took quite a while because I had to source them from multiple places. These parts are getting kind of hard to find now, but I was able to get everything that I need to rebuild this transmission. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I got a bunch of like loose metal in here, like bearing pieces and stuff. I'm gonna try to get that out with a magnet, and then I'm going to dump this thing over and drain it in there. And then we'll go ahead and start pulling out. We gotta pull off this reverse gear first, and then we can pull out the gear set.
I won't fall into that box. Energy, energy, energy. Live up to my name. Go wrong, take the blame. Never wanted other fame. I stay away from that lane. I can still wake up and ball out. All in my court, I go ball out. Look at my baby go all out. Energy, energy, energy.
Okay, as you can see, we got the transmission guts pulled out right there. Everything looks okay on that stuff. The counter shaft, like you saw earlier, is a little bit chewed up on top, but otherwise all of that stuff is perfectly good. You can go right back in the car. If we look in here, input shaft bearing is still good. I'm gonna replace it just because I've had this stuff in and out so many times. I have a feeling the seal in there is bad. So I did buy a whole rebuild kit. We're gonna replace all the bearings. This bearing down here is gonna come up, but as you can see, it's pretty burnt up, and that is from that bearing on top exploding, putting all of the weight on this bearing down here. It is still good, but you can see the transmission is a little bit chewed up around the outside here, as well as right here too. This edge is a little bit chewed up. I imagine that's from movement with the input shaft. The spring washer is probably worn out too. So I got a new spring washer that should keep some pressure off of this casing here. And any of this, I'm not really gonna worry about it too much. If it is in the way, it'll probably self-clearance a little bit. The rest of everything in here looks perfectly fine from what I can see. There's a couple chunks of metal still, and there was a lot in the magnet here that I pulled out and cleaned off. I'm gonna go ahead and use my little whiz wheel that I use to get the RTV off of my Subaru motor, and I'm gonna clean up all of these edges before I spray out the inside of here with brake cleaner. And I'm also going to clean up the RTV off that side as well.
Motherfucker, I've been mortified, fortified, feeling like a Mordecai. I ain't regular, feel like Jordan wearing 45. Traumatized, victimized, seen some of my die. Knock you off a base with a bat when them niggas slide. Homicide, genocide, televised, emphasize, perpetuating war. Tell that nigga he gon' pick a side. Hood ties from hood lines, my nigga doing dope lines. Don't run into the cops, that's a big exercise. Don't run into the cops, that's the motto. I don't see it coming to an end like legato. Get chipped like staccato, send a wave through the hood, now it's sounding like vibrato. Why you eat bread with avocado? We be trying to dodge shells before it landing our tomato. Singing all my sorrows on Apollo. I've been trying to pave the way, but they didn't tell me it was potholes. America ain't dreaming it.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pull out these two bearings as well as the input shaft seal that's in here, and I'm gonna replace the seal first and then the two bearings.
Sounding like a real anthem. Shawty saw my wallet, now she think I answer. Whoa, telling me she wanted me to hammer. Trying to get saved, baby, I am not the answer. No, I can never trick. Unless the bitch is my bitch with a kiss on my lips like, I am not a pimp with a lip, I'm a man with a gift, and I'm doing my shit like, Tell them other niggas I'm the nip. I'm the man in the city, and my bank account bigger, and my body count bigger, that's without a doubt. I'm 100 steps ahead, that's a lot of mouth, that's a lot of clout. What you all about? What your dollar amount? You a boy scout.
All right, an hour later, and we have these bearings in. I'm not entirely sure if it matters which way they're installed. I installed these the same way the previous ones were. This one, it's hard to tell, so I just put the text up. The seals that came with this kit didn't have any grease or anything on them, so I oiled the outside, and then I greased the inside with that grease right there to help the input shaft slide in once we go ahead and install that. The other thing here is on this one, these are the same brand bearings, but on this one, the text was on this side. On this bearing, the text was on this side. So I don't really think it matters. This is how it was installed, with this way facing up, so that's how I installed it on this one. This was really, really hard to get out for some reason, probably because the metal is all chewed up around it. So I had quite a bit of trouble getting this bearing out. Chewed this piece up a little bit on the inside, this little plastic piece, but I verified that the counter shaft still fits in there just fine. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. So now, next we are going to start rebuilding the counter shaft and the input shaft. To do that, what you need to do is just flip it over and smack it on a piece of wood to get all the gears to fall off. If you need help with that, like if it doesn't just work easily, then you can heat them up with MAP gas or propane to get the gears off. What I do is I leave them in the pile that they come off in, and then I reassemble them with new parts in the reverse order. So that's what I'm going to work on right now. Okay, so the new bearings are in the trans there, and the counter shaft and input shaft are both rebuilt. I got new friction dampers on the counter shaft for first and second gear, all new bearings, new synchros. I also got a new nut and washer right here. There's a spring washer on top, and I don't know exactly which way it goes, so those are not torqued yet. I'm gonna have to look that up. But everything else here is installed correctly. So we'll go ahead and pick back up on this later. All right, guys, got the counter shaft right here. I actually took it to my dad's house and wrapped it up, put it in a vise with wood on both sides of the gears, clamped it down pretty tight, and torqued that nut on top down to 80 foot-pounds, and then staked it. I don't have a vise here, so I had to take it somewhere else to do that, but counter shaft is done. The next thing that we're working on is the differential bearings. I just replaced these when I put the differential in last year, so they're definitely still good. I don't have to replace them, but the kit came with brand new bearings. I want to make sure all the bearings are the same age in the transmission. The ones on here are NTN. The ones in the kit are Nachi bearings, same quality. I think they were both used for OEM. Some kits I've received had NTN bearings, and some had Nachi bearings for the differential. But I'm gonna go ahead and swap them out just so that everything in this transmission is the same age, all of the parts that break down. So I'll work on that now. So we got the new bearings on here now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and reassemble the transmission. I'll put the differential in first, and then put the gear set in with those new washers over there. And I gotta put the new snap ring into the casing right here. And then we'll bolt the rest of the stuff in. So the transmission is all together. I really should probably clean it up, but I'm not going to. I cleaned up all the old grease off of here and put new grease on the throwout bearing. Throwout bearing's still good, fairly new clutch. So the plan here is, because I basically bicep curled this down onto this dolly and rolled it out. I pulled the bumper off the car. We are gonna roll this under, and then I'm going to use another one of those things with the chain. It's on the floor right there, and I'm gonna wrap the chain around this, and I'm gonna pick it up. I won't be able to orientate it correctly. I'm gonna pick it up with that. The front's gonna droop down. I'm gonna have to pick it up by hand, but at least then it'll be holding some of the weight for me. I'm gonna go ahead and try that, and then I'll show you guys if it worked or not. Okay, so with a little bit of effort, I was able to get this transmission in all by myself. First time I've ever been able to do it by myself, which is cool. The mount being right here just got in the way. I had to lower everything back down, and it was really hard once I had everything lifted up. So the chain ended up fitting under this bracket right here, and that's how I lifted it up, which kind of lifted the back and the front. So we had to lift that side over there, which I did with just a jack underneath. So use a jack underneath the front and the chain on the back, and I was able to raise the transmission up pretty evenly and then slip it on. There is a little bit of a gap here, but I did confirm that I can push the transmission all the way on. It just pops off because the mount on the back has moved and is pushing against the transmission. So I'm gonna go ahead and bolt this thing up with the bell housing bolts, and then I'll get that mount straightened out over there. It took me a little while because that back mount was giving me trouble, like I said. So I got that mount lined up and got all the bolts in. This mount was pretty easy, and this front mount lined right up as well. So everything's all bolted in, transmission and mount wise. So now we just got to go ahead and start putting everything back together. I'm just going to time lapse like I have been, not really go into detail too much. There are plenty of videos that I have where I do go into more detail with this. So go ahead and take a look at one of those. Or watch my transmission removal video, but do everything in reverse. Alright guys, that's the end of this video. So after finishing that up, I took the car for a test drive and everything is fine. It makes a slight noise in fourth gear, but it's pretty quiet and it makes sense due to all the metal that was bouncing around in there. Other than that, it works perfectly. So I finished filming this in January of this year. It's now months later. I've been daily driving this car actually, and it's holding up perfectly fine. So fingers crossed it keeps working. There's probably a small chance that something similar ends up happening again, considering I did not change the shim in the casing or measure it. So hopefully it's fine. Anyway, for more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. Consider giving this video a thumbs up if you liked it. But thank you guys so much for watching. Peace out.